with her dog. Okey-dokey. Yeah, she, I think that mountain lion, I mean, it must see people all the time. It's been photographed sort of watching joggers go by in the early morning, but I don't know, I'm not gonna roll the dice.
Okay.
Alrighty, Miyako, go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this evening's book chat. We're featuring Megha Majumdar for the paperback tour of A Burning. My name is Miyako, and I'm on the event team at University Bookstore in Seattle, Washington. Thank you for supporting the local author. Thank you for supporting this author event in a local indie bookstore. University of Washington Bookstore is the oldest indie bookstore in the region, and in fact, we are celebrating our 121st anniversary year. Tonight, we are thrilled to present Megha in conversation with Maggie Shipstead, who wrote A Great Circle. A few announcements before we start. This event is being recorded. It will be played back on our YouTube channel in a few days. We will be dropping links for the books in the chat periodically, and you can purchase a copy of a signed book plate from us at any time. We thank you for your ongoing support. After the discussion, there will be a chance for an audience Q&A, so please put your questions in the Q&A field at the bottom of the screen. At any time during the talk that you feel like, we will get to them at the end of the discussion, and let us know where you're from. A Burning is an electrifying debut novel about three unforgettable characters who seek to rise to the middle class through political power and fame in India's film industry. Megha was born and raised in Kolkata, India. She moved to the United States to attend college at Harvard University and followed graduate school in social anthropology at Johns Hopkins University. She works as an editor at Catapult Books and lives in New York City. A Burning is her first novel. Maggie Shipstead is the New York Times-bestselling author of the novels Great Circle, Astonish Me, Seating Arrangements, which won the Dylan Thomas Prize and the LA Times Book Prize for First Fiction. She is a graduate of Harvard, the Iowa Writers Workshop, and a former Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford. She is often away from her home in Los Angeles. So now, please join us in welcoming Megha and Maggie.
Thanks, Miyako. Yay, I'm so excited to chat. So not to sort of regurgitate your entire bio, but I feel like you have such an interesting sort of like primordial ooze as a novelist. You know, you have your childhood and adolescence in India, coming to the US as a teenager to go to Harvard, your study of anthropology, both as an undergrad and graduate student, and you're an editor. Now you're a fiction writer as well. So I was wondering if you would just sort of walk us through the process of how you came to write fiction and how you came to write this particular book. And you can like go back to infancy if you want, whatever makes sense.
Oh my God. Well, thank you so much, Maggie, first of all, for joining me for this conversation. Thank you, University Bookstore. Thank you, Miyako and Grace and Ed. How did I come to write fiction? You know, I think a key thing, and I will take you up on your suggestion to go back quite early. A key thing for me was learning English. You know, I grew up in a Bengali speaking household in India, and English was a language that I was really terrified of. I had to go to special English coaching classes because when I was a kid, everybody told me, the lesson that I absorbed was, you have to learn English in order to move ahead. You know, this is what the world is like. You have to learn English to go to a good school and get a job. And it was a language that really scared me. It was so foreign. So learning English and reading books like, people don't really read Enid Blyton here in the US, but we read so much Enid Blyton, a British author in India. Did you ever read her, Maggie?
No, I really only know her from references in English books about children reading.
Yeah. So I read so much Enid Blyton. I read Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys and all of these books. And they kind of unlocked for me that if English can occupy these extremely foreign territories, these places that I've never been, with characters eating things I've never seen, then it can also settle into my life. I can also write about the markets and streets and parks and the textures of places that I know. And I think that was a really key realization that let me start writing in English. And then, I've always been interested in other people's perspectives. And anthropology is so much about that. So you went to Harvard too, right?
Yeah, I checked. I don't think we overlapped because I graduated in 2005 and I think you got there in 2006. Is that right?
Yeah. Which house were you in?
I was in Adams, and funnily enough, I went in thinking I would be a social anthro concentrator, and I took intro to social anthro, and I was like, no, you aren't allowed to judge people. And that was a big deterrent to me. So I was an English concentrator.
Oh my God. We ate in Adams all the time. I was in FOHO.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. But yes, and so like anthropology, it's funny that you went in knowing that's what you wanted to do, because I didn't even know what the discipline was. I just found myself taking a lot of classes that happened to be in the anthro department. And it's so much about going out into the world, listening to other people's stories, trying to understand the complexities of their lives. And I think that's such a valuable toolkit for a fiction writer to have. And I realized also that, the part of anthropology that I loved was talking to people and thinking about their stories. I was less excited about coming back to the department and putting those experiences in conversation with theory. I was not a brilliant theoretical mind. I was more excited about story. But I was still, kind of a tinkerer. I wrote short stories, but nothing that I took very seriously until I came to the idea for this book.
Oh, wow. And so how long ago was that? Like, you must have been pretty entrenched in your career as an editor by this point, and done with your master's degree in anthropology. So wait, sorry, I'll just back that up a little bit though. So you did a master's in anthropology, and so did you consider going into academia? Was that sort of the plan when you started that?
Yeah, it was a PhD program that I left with a master's, because I felt like in order to make a real contribution in anthropology, I would have to work in a very theoretical mode. I feel like so much of current anthropology is actually very close to philosophy. And I felt less excited about that abstract register. I felt more excited about the specific, vivid register of people's stories.
Yeah.
And, it's almost like in order to be a great thinker in anthropology, you have to subsume those stories and you have to make them serve the theory. And I didn't really want to do that. So I left and I started working in books, in publishing, and it felt like a more public space where you can still engage with intelligent ideas and you can still think about the complexity of narratives. But it wasn't so closed, the academy also felt very closed to me.
Sure. Yeah, it's
Did you
kind of
go?
the opposite process, because I remember just in my brief foray into social anthro, I would, get the reading list and I would be like, this sounds amazing. This sounds so interesting. And then I'd read the book. Like, I remember one book that was about like all the different kinds of McDonald's around the world and like how that functions within cultures. I was like, cool, but then it would be so boring. Or like another one followed like a tiny neighborhood in Tokyo. And I was like, fascinating. But then it would just sort of sap all the life out of it. I feel like, fiction and anthropology, maybe you're both sort of starting with people's sort of thoughts and experiences. And then anthropology, you're pushing it away from the personal, and fiction, you're like leaning into the personal sort of as hard as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. So you always knew that you wanted to do graduate school. You went to Iowa, so you knew that you wanted to pursue writing pretty early?
No, well, so I took two fiction classes in college, fiction workshops, and then I wrote a creative thesis of short stories. And then I graduated and I had literally no idea what I wanted to do. Like I spent another year in Boston and I lived with friends and I sort of worked at a law firm and I was just completely clueless. And so I applied to Iowa because it was the only MFA program I'd heard of. And I just kind of thought like, oh, I won't get in and I'll just like regroup and like maybe reapply next year and apply other places. But then I got in. And so it was like somebody telling me where to go and what to do. And so things just kind of worked out, which I don't know, maybe you feel this way too. Like for me, in some ways, I think the organic way I came to be a writer, just by like sort of opportunities continuing to materialize, was better for me than if I'd had sort of this ideal of myself, like typing away in an attic. You know, I wasn't really attached to sort of romantic vision of being a writer. Although I was always attached to books and I think had, like you were describing, sort of formative experiences as a child with fiction.
What were your formative experiences as a child?
Just like reading everything, you know,
Yeah.
whatever I could find. And I don't think I'll ever be able to read that way again, just so open, you know, just kind of
Yeah.
fall into anything no matter what it was.
Did you ever read super inappropriate? Like I remember
Oh,
reading
yeah.
Roald Dahl's adult stories, which are so twisty and like,
My Uncle Oswald. Did you read that one?
I don't remember the titles. Wait.
It's the one where these people have decided to start a sperm bank using the genetic material of famous men. And so they have to go like travel around the world collecting it. It's
I
very
do not
naughty.
remember
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
But yeah, super inappropriate stuff. But it was great. Yeah. And it was a kind of Catholic reading practice that I
Mhm.
miss now.
Yeah, absolutely. Although that does kind of lead into my next question, because as an editor, you must be reading a lot on submission and a lot that you're working on. So how did you sort of create space in your sort of life and mind to then start working on this? And like, when did the idea for this book sort of present itself to you?
You know, it started from really watching the news and watching what was happening in India and
Mm-hmm.
feeling really alarmed at the rise of this hatred-filled extremist ideology. And I was thinking about, well, you know, in this circumstance, how do people hold on to their dreams and their ambitions and their
Mm-hmm.
humor and spirit? And what does it mean to live within a society, within systems that do not serve you?
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like I finally arrived at questions that felt important to me to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't felt that way before.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I needed the space and the scale of a novel to ask these questions most powerfully.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I kind of got started, is with that feeling that here are these questions that feel important to ask.
Mm-hmm.
How
Yeah,
did
I think that's, I always feel like I start with questions too, rather than, you know, some sort of point you're trying to make. And I felt like this book really had that feeling of openness. And I think too, something that's kind of amazing about it is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt to me like there's a feeling in the book that a person's entire story matters, you know, and it's when we sort of lose context for each other that we get into trouble and sort of lose track of each other's humanity. But at the same time, it's like quite a slender book. And so I was curious about how you sort of felt your way to the wholeness of each of the stories and how you sort of balance the three point of view characters, which for those who haven't read, there's Javon, who's unjustly accused of a terrorist act. Lovely, who is do you pronounce it Hydra?
A hijra, yes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of a third gender you can probably explain better than I can. And then PT Sir, who's sort of a school teacher who starts to rise through a nationalist political party. And the first two are in first person and PT Sir is in third person. So it's this really interesting kind of, yeah, balance and interchange between these characters who are connected to each other. Yeah, so just a long way of asking how you sort of came upon the structure of the book.
Yeah, so like the big original question that I had for the book, I felt that I needed to break it down into parts, and each character allowed me to ask a part of that question. For instance, with Jivan, the central character, I was asking, what happens when you have to push back against the narrative that the state imposes on you? What resources do you have? How do you make that happen when it is a battle of narratives?
Mm-hmm.
And then with PT Sir, the school teacher who becomes involved in this political party, I was thinking about, what happens when this very ordinary person who is, disrespected in his daily life, his students are always trying to get out of his classes. What happens when such a person sees an opportunity to rise in this society and gets a little taste of political power? What of their morals will they sacrifice? What will they decide their ethical center is? So I think those questions felt important to me, and these characters were ways for me to ask those questions. I really want to ask you the same question, Maggie, because I'm reading Great Circle, and it's such a vast and epic book. I have so many questions about how you held the whole story in your head, but also where did it start for you?
It started with I had been working on a different project that died on me, and I was at the airport in Auckland in like 2012. And there was a statue of a female pilot, and I was like, oh, I should write a book about a female pilot. And just was like, good, now that's decided. And didn't start working on it for another 2 years, because my second book had come out and I was doing stuff for that. And then I'm incapable of outlining or planning. And so I just had to start and just sort of hope for the best. And the sort of secondary storyline came to me pretty early on in the process. But I just kind of had to go. And I've had to do this with my other books as well, although they started as short stories. So they had some more constraints. Um, and it took 3 years and 3 months to write the first draft, which was 980 pages. It's like 300,000 words.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And yeah, I often had the feeling that it was just like getting away from me in all these different directions. I was trying to hold like a big ball of air together or something. And it was really challenging for me to just like keep the faith that I was going to be able to finish it and pull it all together. Yeah, and a lot of it came down to also I use Scrivener to write. Do you use Scrivener?
No, I have heard so much about it, but I've never used it. Do you like it?
Yeah, I can't live without it. Like I don't even write when I write like short magazine pieces, I'll write them in Scrivener too because I'm so used to
Mm.
it. Yeah, I'd recommend giving it a shot. But do you outline? So like did you have a plan for this when you started?
I did not. No,
Mm-hmm.
I did not have a plan. I just had these 3 documents going for the 3 characters because I started writing it in one document and I realized that I was just losing track of where each story was.
Totally.
So I separated them out, and then I wanted to make sure that each character has an arc that stands on its own. So I wrote these 3 stories and then I kind of stitched them back together. And of course, I realized that I had made so many mistakes with, time and seasons and things like that. And so I had to smooth those out. So it was quite a process. I should probably have used Scrivener.
It can help because it kind of solves the problem of one document or many, because you can have lots of little documents that you can easily switch between and move around. It's very helpful. But so like, theoretically, at least, all fiction writers are kind of editors, or you're supposed to at least attempt to edit your own work in a preliminary way. But not all editors are writers. So I was wondering if your experience as an editor has informed your experience as a writer, and now if your experience as a writer, particularly published writer, informs your work as an editor.
I think one way in which my work as an editor influences my writer self is I read such a huge volume of manuscripts, and part of my job is to articulate to my colleagues why I like or do not like something. And that's a very helpful sharpening tool, because I constantly have to examine what it is that I am drawn to in these pages. And it helps me set goals for my own writing. I realize what kind of complexity, what kind of pace, what kind of dialogue, what kind of register, what kind of setting or mood appeals to me. And I have something to work toward in my own writing. And the other part of it is just when I do acquire a book and then I'm working very closely with an author, we think through things like, all the way from structure to, sentence level and word choice level questions. And it's so energizing to be really close to somebody else's mind as they are thinking through these things, and to think about the organization of stories. I think I have become better at logic in a narrative as a result of thinking through logic in so many narratives, so I think those are the ways.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think that's like something that's missing for a lot of writers. I'm super, super detail oriented, and so it always bothers me when there's a logical hole. But it's so much easier to see as a reader of other people's writing. And when it's your writing, it's pretty easy to be like, oh, it's just a little like artistic license, or it's just a little like flourish, no one will mind. But like, it really has consequences, I think, when things don't hang together.
Yeah. How did you bring Great Circle down from its original length to, I mean, it's still a big book. I think it's like 600 pages.
Yeah, I mean, and if it were a manuscript, it would be 750. So we really only cut about 25% of the length. And yeah, I was going to ask you about your experience with our mutual editor, Jordan Pavlin at Knopf. I've worked, this is my third book with her. And I mean, from the beginning, she was like, it needs to be shorter. And I was kind of like, does it? Like, I don't know, and she was absolutely right. It did, which is something I felt in my bones by the time I was reading the second round of proofs. And I was like, this book cannot be one more page. I can't read it again. But we really, I mean, most of the cutting, so yeah, I cut 230 pages off the manuscript, and it was really mostly small pervasive cuts. And it was so long that if I cut, a paragraph or even a few sentences off every page, it really added up. And so I just compressed. I think Jordan and I did 4 drafts maybe, and each time it lost some length. And there were a couple places where I cut bigger chunks, but then often I'd have to write something new to bridge the gap. So it'd be sort of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I was pretty adamant that it would stay a long book. Like, it was important to me that it sort of be allowed to have this sort of heft. And there, sometimes with long books, people will be like, does it really need to be that long? And it's like, no, it doesn't. But like, novels don't really need to exist. Like, all of this is extraneous in a way. So it's just a different kind of storytelling. But I want to talk about your, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I see why your book needs to be this length, because there is something really epic about it. I mean, I think the resonance between the themes of a woman's ambition and just everything that both of these women have to go through, and just the vastness of that ambition and the scale of the challenges that they have to cross to do it. Like I see it. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's like a
it became
bigness there.
totally, and it became about the bigness too. Like that was part of the point, was just about how impossible it is to sort of grapple with the hugeness of a life or of the world, and the sort of impossibility of putting that in a book. But yeah, so who were your first readers? I mean, I want to get to Jordan, but I feel like the missing piece before that is like, did you workshop this? Did you just show it to friends? Did you just skip right ahead and find an agent? Like, what was the process of sort of leading it toward publication?
I shared pages with one friend. We did our little two-person workshops for a long time. This was obviously pre-COVID, so we would like meet after work at a diner or something and just like share pages and talk about our pages. And it was really lovely. So we did that for a while. So it was just that friend and then my husband. They were the two early readers that I had. No one else really saw it. I sent it to my parents like when I was preparing to send it out to an agent, because my parents are still in India and I wanted to run a lot of this by them and see how they think, you know, about the truthfulness of what was in the pages. Yeah, so a very small circle of people. I think in many ways, because I was working on it in solitude for so long, I felt that it was kind of a secret, you know, and I had
Mm-hmm.
one chance to show it to people. So I didn't want to expose it too much. It also felt like it was something that I never really talked about. It just, did you feel this way with your first book, or maybe with all your books? Did you talk about it as you were working on it?
Not much. And Great Circle was really like, I don't know. Yeah, more than 3 years with nobody reading it. And then my agent read
Mm,
it and I did a revision and then we sold it. So I also don't have a lot of readers. And I find it, I think maybe it's connected to us not being outliners either. Like, I think for me, part of the reason I don't outline is that I find it really deadening. And so I think also trying to describe something that's in process can be deadening as well. Um,
right.
and I think that's connected to the idea of starting with questions, because
Yeah.
it can be almost painful to be like, and then this happens, and then this happens. And something about hearing yourself say it out loud when it's not done is like, oh, I don't know, it's unsettling, or it can be for me.
And also, like the book is its own act of communication, right? So you don't want to, if you keep talking about it, it's like you are letting the book be communicated in other ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just want it to sort of stand on its own.
Yeah.
And so what was your process like with Jordan?
With Jordan, well, first of all, I was amazed that she was interested in it. I have worshipped like her work, so many of her authors for so long. And I remember having an early conversation with my agent where we were talking about, you know, dream editors. And Jordan was at the top of that list. And I just thought, you know, like here it is, my dream list, but obviously it's never going to happen. So it was just incredible to me that she wanted it. And then she is so, I mean, I remember we did a lot of sentence level edits. She made a lot of really great cuts. The book started in a different place, and she suggested that we started where it starts now. There was initially what feels now like a false opening. There was a scene of, so the book starts with a train attack, and that was its own section. And I kind of talked about the passengers in the train and what happened.
Right. Yeah.
And Jordan pointed out that that felt a little false because there was that opening and then there was an opening with the character being introduced. So it was like two beginnings, which we didn't need.
That is so interesting. And that does seem really wise, because the other aspect of it, I think, is I felt almost a relief when I started it, where I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to read like a deep description of this horrible thing. But of course the book doesn't let you off the hook. Like, it's more that you're at the beginning of like the climb to sort of this like creeping, you know, dread, and there are some horrific things that happen, but it's much later. And I think like if you would have almost like, I don't know, like blown out people's taste buds or something right away if you started that way. That's so interesting.
True. Yeah, yeah. Because I feel like she really wanted me to start with this central character and have this character be introduced right away. And then after I had turned in the edits, we had lunch and she was like, well, I have one more edit to suggest to you, like only if you're open to it, like don't feel, you know. And I was like, oh shit, she like hates the end and like wants me to make this huge edit. But she had a suggestion about cutting half of one sentence. And so, you know, that's
classic.
That's the level of care. I mean, you've worked with her for 3 books, which just sounds like a dream. But even this, you know, one book, it's just such a privilege to have her touch it.
Yeah. I always say that, you know, some people are really aggressive about defining their taste by what they don't like, you know, and Jordan certainly has specific taste, but I feel like her taste is defined by radical openness. You know, she's just so open and takes books on their own terms, and just seems to have this endless sort of, I don't know, like willingness to invest her empathy in fiction. It's amazing. Yeah, she's an amazing editor.
Yeah, she's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Maggie, which I have been thinking about, which is that like over your books, and maybe, you know, now that you are, you know, talking about Great Circle, are there, like, what do you think are the obsessions in your books that you will carry forward? Like when you look ahead to your future career and your future writing life, what are the things that excite you most at this stage?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I feel like I'm always like inchworming my way from one project to the next or one book. I'm like a little bit moving away from what I've been doing. Although Great Circle is a little different because I can really see both of my first 2 books in it. Some of the kind of sharpness or acidity of seating arrangements is in the sort of movie star plotline, and some of the structural stuff I did in Astonish Me is in the structure of Great Circle. And all my books are sort of about obsession in really different ways. So I imagine that like there's no way away from that. I think your subjects kind of stick to you. But I haven't, like, my nerd answer is like, what excites me about writing another book is structure. Like I just want to like try something different, like continue to sort of build stories in different ways, and sort of create connections with different sorts of stories. And I'm not going to do like another big historical epic next by any means. And so I'm writing another family book, I think, but I think it's going to be a lot more complex than seating arrangements. So I just feel like it's always like this process of sort of taking what you learn from each book and, you know, hopefully folding it into into the next. I don't know. What about you? What
Yeah.
do you have? Do you have another book? Are you working on one?
I'm working very, very slowly on one. I feel like the pandemic year has just
Yeah.
obliterated all boundaries. And it's a little hard to protect time for writing. Do you
Absolutely.
write full time? Do you teach? Or
I
you
don't
write full
teach.
time?
Yeah.
Amazing. Um, but yeah, it's just, I have a full-time job and it's very consuming.
Sure.
So yeah, it's going slowly, but it's going. I'm excited
Yeah.
about it.
I don't know how people with full-time jobs write books. Like I have this like sea of time and I'm still just like, oh, like I have to go to the post office this week. Like this week is shot. And I do also write for magazines. So that used to take up a lot of my time before the pandemic. So we'll see.
Do you write
Um,
nonfiction?
yeah, I write for travel magazines.
Oh, that's amazing. That is so
Mm,
cool. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a travel writer. That was my original dream.
yeah, it's a pretty good gig. I mean, I couldn't really do it full time. Like the people who do that just really, really hustle and they do so many stories. But kind of 2018, 2019, I did 5 or 6 trips a year. So I was gone a lot and it would really it did disrupt, writing fiction, but I think also really enriched it, particularly this book with its sort of geographical
Yeah.
scope.
You
I
traveled
just
so much for this book, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot on assignment, and some for myself, but yeah, it was this sort of symbiotic thing where my travel was feeding the book, and then the book was also driving some of my travel, so really changed my life. And it was also for me, it was good. Like my first 2 books came out within 2 years of each other, and so I was like living this cycle of going to book festivals and doing book events, and then like the next book comes out and the next paperback comes out, and the first couple years I was writing Great Circle, I sort of felt like, oh no, I'm gonna get left behind, like it's all over, but nobody cares, like nobody notices, it doesn't matter. It was fine. And it was good for me to sort of, I don't know, reform my life in some ways about something else, or
Yeah.
about other things. Yeah.
I think that's one of the most freeing thoughts that I had when I was working on the book is that nobody cares if I write this or not. So the only person that I want to please, the only reader is me in my mind, and nobody's waiting for this book. And that was kind of
Mhm.
freeing.
Mhm. Just as an aside to our viewers, you can put questions in the Q&A. We have one from Anand, which we kind of talked about, and the question came in exactly when I was asking a similar question, but one part of it we didn't really talk about is, did Javan, PT, Sir, and Lovely come to life in your head collectively, or did you imagine one before another?
I think the character that I had first was Jivan, but I had a kind of child self. I had a
Mm,
kind of child section of Jivan who I don't think made it into the final part of the book, but I was really interested in writing that part of childhood where you realize what your parents' struggles are. And for this character, I was writing sections where she, as an adolescent, sees how her parents are challenged by the systems that they live within, that their
mhm,
housing is insecure, that when they go to the doctor, they are not taken seriously, that they work so hard and yet they cannot move up because this is the state of the society that they live in. And, a child's determination that she will make things better for her parents. I found that really moving and powerful, and I wanted to write toward that realization. So that's
mhm,
kind of where Jivan started. And then another character, Lovely, actually started because I was so interested in a character for whom books are not important.
Mm.
I wanted to write a character who disdains book learning and,
Yeah.
just thinks that books are useless. Because I think there can be a lot of preciousness around books. And I grew up seeing how books don't change anything for a lot of people. So while I was writing this book, like I knew that it's very important to me and I felt that I was asking important questions, but at the same time, is it going to change the life of a person who's working as, a tailor's apprentice in Kolkata? No,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
do anything for them. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that like those two things, that I love books, but books do nothing for a lot of people. Those two things I held in my head at the same time. And I wanted this character who's like, books, whatever.
Yeah.
They're kind of useless. And that's where Lovely started.
Yeah. Totally fair. Did you feel, I mean, maybe there's sort of an inherent silliness to this question because it just has to do with the circumstances of like books in English in this country about India. But did you feel sort of a pressure of representation, like writing about, your native country in your sort of adopted country and sort of casting your lens back on it? Or was it comfortable for you or was it tricky?
Hmm. I think part of what I felt is that I grew up seeing people deal with problems in, a kind of bureaucracy obsessed place where things don't really work and you have to be inventive and find your own solutions. I saw people deal with it with a lot of humor. And I felt that I often didn't see that in stories.
Mm.
People laugh about problems a lot. And every time I go home, I always hear stories about people who are finding creative solutions to things. And, we grew up with stuff like that. Like, I remember when there was a shortage of change, like coins at the stores. And so if you went to the store and you bought a loaf of bread and they didn't have change to give you, they would give you like a bit of candy equivalent to that value,
Uh-huh.
So stuff like that, people dealt with it so creatively and with so much spirit. And that's something that I wanted to have in the book is
Mm-hmm.
the texture of the place was not just about writing, vivid visual description, but about capturing the spirit of people who live there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like this is something that I've been thinking about as I'm reading your book, Maggie, because like you talked about how you were trying to hold all of these details together, but like I'm thinking about, section where a character is working for a person who makes moonshine and like is delivering bottles, and like it's so vivid and it's such a rich section, even though like ultimately she moves on and like it's she does other stuff. Or like what was your process for punching depths into this story? How were you writing these depths?
Well, I mean, some of it maybe just came down to the sort of lack of, uh, I don't know, maybe discipline is the word. I don't know. I would just sort of, an idea would sort of float by and be shiny, and I'd be like, and take the bait, and then like get dragged along by it for a while, and I just have to see where it went. Um, But I kind of gave myself permission to do that from the beginning. I just sort of was like, this will be a kitchen sink novel in some ways that's just like what matters to me, what I'm interested in right now. Like, I'm just going to put it all in and then like sort it out later, which, I did 25% I did. Um, but that's just like always kind of the mystery, and it's like, where are the boundaries of a book? And I think people sometimes will be like, oh, it's a book set in India. It must tell me everything about India, which of course is not possible. Just like you couldn't write a book
Yeah.
that tells you everything about the US or California or anything.
Yeah.
And I think some of that, there's this sort of books like Midnight's Children and A Fine Balance kind of loom really large, and everyone's like, that sort of suggest in a concrete way the complexity and scale of this country. But I feel like so much of that came through in your book, even without the page count. Like how did you think about scale? Or was it, and you use these, like your interlude sections, I think are interesting too. Were those always in there? Did those come later?
The interludes were always part of it.
Mm.
It was, I felt that part of what was important was to signal that this is such a rich world, and I can't possibly follow every character, nor do I want to have characters who only function as devices. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to indicate that every character who shows up, no matter how minor they are in the narrative, they have their own worries and hopes and superstitions and things that they care about. And the interludes were really fun to write, because I was able to follow these characters and kind of give them facets that the rest of the story perhaps didn't reveal.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed saying to the reader, well, here are the main characters, but here are all of these other people that you could follow. Like there's a whole novel existing outside the margins of this particular book. So I think signaling that this is one story and you could follow so many other stories, signaling that felt important to me, perhaps as a way of pushing back against what you're talking about, is this, call to write a book which tells you everything about, a place. Yeah.
Well, I have a couple more questions. So just a reminder to anyone with a burning question I haven't asked yet. But so yeah, I have two more that I really want to ask you. And one's sort of dark and the other's more like practical. And the darker question is sort of, Jivan is the victim of a terrible injustice that also has sort of an absurd edge to it. And so as a writer, was it hard for you to sort of sit with that for the amount of time that it takes to write a book? Like what was sort of did it take an emotional toll on you, or were you able to sort of maintain a distance from it?
I think I felt that, for a while I considered making the outcome of this arc different from what it is in the
Mm-hmm.
book, but I also felt that I was very interested in what happens when an individual goes up against the state. What can you do against the might of the state? And I think, we have seen in so many countries around the world, not just India, what happens when the state decides that it needs a scapegoat and you need to be punished. It is very difficult to go up against it, even for somebody with resources, let alone somebody who, is low income and does not have powerful advocates, does not have money, does not have, the best lawyers. So I wanted to follow the truth of that to its end. And I wanted to see, I wanted to sit with the difficulty of that. I didn't want the book to shy away from it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, I found some hope in writing her will and her determination to get her story out, and the ways in which she conspires to, please a person that she has to, or like figure out how to get a reporter to visit
Mm-hmm.
her so she can get her story in the news, and her understanding that public opinion sways the courts much more than we might want to believe. Yeah, so I wanted to write her as a person who is doing her best, but also not have it be, you know, like a wish fulfillment ending where she gets what she wants, you know, despite everything.
Yeah, and there's
But
so much interplay between sort of everybody's best and worst natures in the book too. There's, you know, all the characters feel compassion, have moments of deep compassion and moments of selflessness, and then, you know, there's this sort of grinding self-interest underneath, and everyone, you know, eventually gets sort of put in these corners where it's like to do the right thing requires almost superhuman altruism. And so the reality is that most people wouldn't rise to the occasion, you know, and I think that did
yeah.
feel really truthful in the book.
I'm so glad, because I feel like, you know, I think about those ethical choices a lot, and I think they show up in all of our lives in different ways. Like, for instance, you know, I read this, I was reading this book called The Secret Life of Groceries. I think that's what it was called. It was
Mm-hmm.
this fascinating book about food logistics
Mm.
and, you know, markets and how food gets there and stuff like that. And it had this section about people in Southeast Asia who farm shrimp, and just the horrible conditions in which they are forced to work and how underpaid they are. And of course, a lot of that shrimp shows up here. And I was thinking about that when I was at the store and like buying shrimp. And, you know, I was participating in a system which was allowing this horribly unethical reality to exist. But I was making a choice out of like convenience and selfishness and, you know, being like, I want to eat shrimp, you know, and like those are the kinds of ethical choices that we're making all the time, is me over somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the book, I was interested in looking at that very closely. Is in the society that we live in, is it possible to think about somebody else's freedom and justice and put it above your own? Or are we caught in systems where we are, you know, pitted against each other, where either I succeed or you succeed, you know? And like
Mm-hmm.
that is the attitude that we have, is like, you cannot lift everybody up together. You have to choose yourself all the time. And like, what a cruel and unethical like murk that is,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um,
And we're
but
presented with these sort of false choices of like, you, the consumer, determine the fate of this person. But
yeah,
it's like, no, it's systemic, it's bigger. You can't
yeah,
actually, you know,
yeah.
climate change, I
But
think is like,
yeah,
sorry.
I was just going to say that like your question about the toll over several years actually makes me think about, like, you were talking about not having an outline, like really writing this huge epic book over several years. How do you, this is something I'm thinking about, how do you preserve playfulness when you are working on something over a period of
Mm.
years? Because parts
I
of this
mean,
book seem so playful to me, and I really love that.
yeah, I mean, it would come and go. You know, I had plenty of bad days, and plenty of days where I was having fun. I mean, some of it was that I think because I didn't have readers, I was really writing to please myself and writing about things that I really wanted to write about. I didn't really have anything in my head like, what should I write about? What will make me seem serious, you know, and important? And I was just, it just felt like what I had to write about. And I think all my books have felt that way, particularly Seating Arrangements and Great Circle. And yeah, oh, we have a late arriving question, which I want to make sure we get to. What from Yvonne, what has been the response to your novel from readers in India? Do your readers in India focus on and ask questions about different elements than your American readers? What has been most surprising about the response? Very interesting.
What has been the response? Well, it has been really gratifying to see Indian readers talk about how the book rang true for them. I think that was really important to me. But yeah, it was like, to be super honest, now that I'm trying to like sift through responses and think about it, like at some point I stopped reading reviews because it felt a little overwhelming to get constant feedback on the book. And I needed to move on and free up brain space for a new project. But it seemed like, you know, people responded to it. It was up for a prize. It was really cool. It was fun.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the other question I was going to ask, which I will ask, and then I think we'll have a few words from the bookstore and wrap up. But I mean, this book you had, so publishing a debut novel is kind of this overwhelming experience to begin with. I think no one can really prepare you for it. Like, even as an editor yourself, I don't know if you could ever be fully prepared, and then let alone sort of having your first book be published in COVID and not being able to go out and see rooms of people and sort of take the temperature of your readers. I mean, and I also think for lots of authors, myself very much included, there's this discomfort with like, how much self-promotion is too much self-promotion? How much is too little? Like, how do you do it right? It seems impossible to do it right. So I guess just like to kind of close this out, what has this experience, you know, been like for you? And I guess like, hopefully, you know, for your next book, you'll be able to have a more standard issue publication, but how's it been?
Oh my God, I don't know, Maggie. I feel like it's downhill from here. We'll probably have like another pandemic or some other kind of apocalypse. How has the experience been? It's been really surreal. You know, when I was writing this, I didn't think that there would be any interest in this book from, you know, a nobody who's writing about India while being in the US. I definitely did not think there would be any US interest in it. And so it's been just a big surprise. You know, it's been a big surprise to see people here respond to it. And I think it's just been kind of weird and magical. Like I can't kind of believe that I'm talking to you. Like, you're such a huge writer, and that I get to do this event with you, and it's just surreal. So I'm trying to, you know, savor it and just enjoy it. And I think the main thing that I want from this experience is to have the chance to write another book. You know, I think I was thinking about like, what do I want from publishing a first book? And so many people talk about this, is that, you know, you want the chance to write another book. You want enough readers and enough faith in your work to have that opportunity again. And so I hope I will have that opportunity. We'll see, I guess, in a few years. But yeah.
I think you will.
Do you think about your debut experience and how, like, I mean, you're a pro at doing publicity at this point. Do you think about how that has changed from book to book for you?
Yeah, I mean, my first book was 2012. I was still in my 20s. I was 28, so I didn't know anything about anything also. And it was a little bit different. Like, things have shifted a lot. Like, the sort of social media component has changed in the past 8 years. My dog is starting to agitate for his dinner. And yeah, you know, it gets easier and it gets harder. I think we'll touch base after your third book and see how you're feeling about it. But you know what's coming, but you also know what's coming. Like, I was reminded right before Great Circle came out, so sort of 2 weeks before the publication, where at any moment, like, a review can come out of the sky and land on your head, and there's nothing you can do. It's out of your hands. I think that never really gets easier, and it's anxiety making. But at the same time, it's like, that life goes on, it's a pretty
Yeah.
quick, the book comes out, it all happens, and then you're like, wait, like I think I'm better at that transition back to being like, okay, onward, like next book. I think your attitude is perfect. So thank you so much. This has been so delightful, and I hope we
Thank
get to
you,
meet in
Maggie.
person before too long.
I would
I
love that
wanted
so
to first
much.
thank both of you for attending this event. It was a very insightful conversation about the process of creating a novel beyond just writing the story. And also wanted to thank the attendees for coming to this event. Remember that all the books are available for purchase with links in the chat, and we have signed book plates for A Burning available. And we hope that everyone attends us at our future events. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Miyako.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.